For the most updated version of the Glyphs RPG blueprint, tokens, accessories and resources, please visit www.glyphsrpg.com. Also visit 2ddice.com for our internationally popular D20 RPG coins and our other masterful coin works.
And right now we're going to get into chapter 25, which explains how we manage encounters, okay? And yes, once again, you probably guessed it, we are mostly going to be focusing on random encounters. So how do we randomize different forms of encounters? That's going to be the emphasis of this chapter. As you can see here by the function glyphs in the illustration, that gives you a pretty good hint on what to expect. So I'm just going to go over a couple quick things here as a preview, and then we're going to spend most of our time randomizing different encounters, okay? So let's get into it. So real quick, on page 431, that pretty much just explains the types of encounters that we recognize in the Glyphs RPG blueprint. Okay, and this badass vampire is putting the superheroine up to the task of seeing if she can manage to survive a surprise encounter with this guy, right? Let's see what she's made of. Anyways, okay, don't mean to get sidetracked there. So with scripted encounters, let's talk about that. A scripted encounter is basically a non-random encounter, right? Something that just normally that the architect would describe just like any situation. Okay, it's part of the structure of the story. Okay, so scripted encounters, real quick, are the easiest ones. So there's two ways you could look at a scripted encounter. Okay, so I'm gonna read along with you. Just gonna summarize real quick. So scripted encounters, like I said, they could be divided into two subcategories. Okay, technically, the first I simply call occasions. Okay, so minute encounters that basically serve to flesh out the character's details a little bit. Okay, they're not necessarily important to the campaign's development whatsoever. You're simply focusing more on character development. So those occasions are definitely nice to have, especially during downtime in the campaign, to give players an opportunity to explore their characters and develop themselves a little bit. Okay, but then more importantly here, to the campaign, we have milestones. That's a second form of encounter, of a scripted encounter that I like to call. Okay, so those are critical events and accomplishments that are vital to the campaign's overall story. Okay, so those are two ways that we looked at scripted encounters here. Okay, so really it's up to you on how you approach that as the game master. Okay, but one thing I want to show you real quick here is how we approach all encounters. Okay, scripted or random. Okay, so any encounter will have a specific topic. Okay, so randomized or not. In this case, it's randomized here in this section, but basically it's going to fall into one of four categories. A social encounter, okay, as designated by the speech bubble function glyph. A combat encounter, pretty self-explanatory, designated by the skull and crossbones function glyph, okay, so the conflict glyph, right? A skill set encounter, which, pretty self-explanatory, is a skill challenge, right? The wrench function glyph, and situational, so a special event, something happening in the background in the overall scene, symbolized by the clock. Okay, so social, different types of encounters there, leaning on interacting with your character, different conversations, different interactions in a social setting, right? Combat, pretty self-explanatory, you're going to be fighting something. Okay, skill set, you're going to be doing a skill check at some point, right? And situational, like I said, it pertains more to the background. So random or not, these are the topics that we recognize. Okay, so any kind of encounter in Glyphs will fall under one of these four categories. So before we focus on the randomizing portion of each of these, I just want to show you real quick what we're going to be doing. Okay, so got your token out here, and to randomize, simply spin it like we normally do, right? And interpret your function glyphs. Okay, so we've already seen those earlier on, so they're right there. Okay, and if you're randomizing, that's going to tell you the topic that it's going to give, okay? So that's all there is to it. Now, before we focus on the randomizing part, I just want to show you. Let me scroll down here real quick for you to see. So page 437 and 438. Very important pages to refer to if you're randomizing an encounter, because each of these has a set of 10 default random encounters that I came up with on my own based on the topic. So each topic here has a set of default encounters. So social encounters, right? Different examples there. Combat encounters. Now, combat encounters are entity driven, so different types of entities there. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Okay, and then skill set encounters here, some default ones that I came up with, different scenarios, right? And then situational encounter defaults. So all these are defaults, like I said, that I came up with. There's a lot of other ones out there. Come up with your own that make sense to you. But for all intents and purposes, the ones in the pretty well I have found out. So just want to show you that. So let's get started real quick. So back up to here, back to our topics. Okay, I just wanted to show you that because that's for you to refer to on your own time. Okay, so if we're going to randomize any encounter, first we'll have to spin and determine our topic. So you spin it, right, and it lands on the function glyph, and boom. Let's say it lands right here on the wrench, right? So that tells you that it's a skill set encounter. Once you know what topic, okay, spin again and interpret your digits from 0 to 9. So in this case, let's say I got 1. Let's say I spin it and my result is 1, right? Now I'm going to narrow down my topic. So let's go down here real quick to that list I showed you. So skill set and 1. So that tells me on this chart here, see I just spun a 1 for skill set, right? So that's a riddle, puzzle, or clue. So right there, that tells you that in that particular setting that your character's in, suddenly the game master throws a random encounter that involves a riddle or puzzle for you to solve, depending on what location they're in. So if they're staring at the wall, right, and they look like they're trapped in the room, well, they look closer in the inscription in the wall, and it gives them a little riddle to solve. And maybe there's a hidden stone somewhere that's got a way out. I mean, it's all context sensitive. That entirely depends on the game master how to interpret that. But these give you really good, powerful clues as to the situation that we're going to be randomizing. So that's an example. Let me go back up here and let's see how we're going to proceed. So here, no. So that's pretty much all there is to it. So here on page 432, once again, it just talks about the topics here. Okay, we've already done step 2. So for spinning from 0 to 9. Okay, so the different subtopics, the random scenarios that I came up with, right? That's what that is. Now, step 3 here just says that the architect defines the variables of the random encounter, okay? So, once again, those scenarios there give you clues, but it's up to you to flesh out all of the details, which is very easy to do once you're in game, okay? So that's pretty much it for the overview. Now I want to spend a little bit of time randomizing each type of encounter because there's a little bit different approach to each besides just the topics here, okay? So bear with me just a second, and we're going to get down to each random encounter type. Now I'm going to go ahead and detail exactly how we flesh out the different types of random encounter scenarios. So first, I'm going to go ahead and start off with the social encounters. So how do we randomize social encounters? So here, obviously, I have my token here. I need that for everything in the game. I have my OmniGrid board here. I'm not going to be using the OmniGrid too much unless I really think I need random letters or clues for whatever reason. But mostly, we're going to be using the function glyphs and the digits for most of the calculations here, and maybe some other ones occasionally. But let's start off with social encounters. So, like we've talked about earlier on in the chapter, first off, we have to do our topic, right? So, and this is random. So I'm spinning, I spin my token, right? And in this case, as an example, it lands on the speech bubble here. So that's social encounters. That's what we're talking about now. So let's say I landed here. That's my speech bubble. That tells me that it's a random social encounter of some kind, okay? So once we've figured that out, then we spin again and we interpret the digits, right? So now the digits are nice. Like I said, they already have pre-mapped out scenarios that I came up with by default. Now, if you think that you don't need to randomize that portion for your setting, if something already comes to mind that makes sense immediately, then go with that. Okay, as the architect, that is definitely your prerogative and something I recommend doing, as a matter of fact. So use what comes to mind first if it applies to your setting, but if you want to just completely randomize it for the sake of randomizing it, then that is what the digits are for. So default scenarios, okay? So I just spun it, okay, and this is purely clinical. That's why I'm showing you all these steps, but you don't need to do all of these at any one time. This is just purely to illustrate how it works. So let's say we know it's a social random encounter. I spun my token and it landed on 1, okay? So I'm going to go down here with you, so 1. Now for that, again, I hate using lists, okay, but in some cases you will need to itemize certain things. This is one of those times, okay? I've already done it for you, or feel free to come up with your own. Take out my default ones and write 10 of your own for each if that works for you. So let's see. So let me look at my notes here. Okay, as always, have a copy of the blueprint on hand. Very nice with smartphones nowadays. Okay, so social encounters. So I just spun a 1, right? And on my default list, that tells me that it's a cultural encounter, okay? So exposure to the cultural aspect of a location, such as ceremonies and art. So maybe my character is walking down an alley and he turns the corner and walks into a museum, right? He says it's a nice bustling museum. He walks in and just exposed to all the city's awesome culture and art, right? Just this beautiful exhibit going on. Just right there in one instant, I described that randomly. So that's a very nice and powerful way to do that. And from there, you can take the story at that point. Maybe something happens in the museum, or maybe your character is focused on one particular art piece, or, you know, that's up to you to figure out. But, you know, the architect will always have to flesh out the details once the clues are given, okay? So we're in a social encounter, okay? We know it's cultural in nature, so in this case, my character walks into a museum. Now, let's say that there's NPC involved, right? Let's say we want to involve NPCs. A lot of these going forward are optional, just for that reference, okay? So let's say that that's important to me. Let's say in that museum, an NPC walks up to me and wants to talk to me about the piece of art. He wants to give me a history lesson or whatever, right? How many people are talking about it, or how many people maybe are looking at the particular exhibit? And let's say I want to know that, okay? If I want to randomize that, spin, okay? And let's see here. So spin the token. And let's see. Now that's only if you need to have more than one NPC, obviously. I mean, a lot of cases it's just easy to go with one, but that option's there, okay? Interpret the digits. That's all we're doing, right? So in this case, I got 4 people. Maybe I got 4 people in front of my character gawking at this ridiculously, you know, abstract art exhibit, right? And that right there gives me an awesome clue just to work with. And maybe those 4 guys are up to something. Maybe they're thinking about stealing it. I mean, who knows? That's up to you, the architect, to figure out. But right there. Now, let's say that's not enough for you. Let's say 4 isn't enough. Let's say I want a big crowd of people, right? Then another option, okay, is simply multiply that result by T1, okay? So how do we do that? So it's 4. So T1, okay? So it's 3. T1 simply means I'm spinning the token and interpreting the element glyph. So my result here, most upright, is this one. So 0 plus 2. So 2, right? Kind of like in the damage system. So 2 times 4 is 8. Let's say, as in this example, I want to multiply and I have 8 people, right? Just an example there. Okay, so I've got that. Now, polarity. Random polarity. Let's say I want to know somebody's random polarity, or in this case, a group, right? What's the overall disposition of this group that my character picks up on in this example? So spin the spin, right? And there it is. Just read the polarity glyphs. Oh, guess what? These guys are up to some serious trouble. Okay, so triple negative. So this crowd of 8 people, they're triple negative, means they're nefarious. So they're about as evil as it comes. So these guys are either planning to steal it, or maybe they're just so obsessed with this piece of art that maybe there's something ceremonial going on that they're planning. You don't really know, but there's something very sinister that they're planning. Okay, so I know that randomly by simply interpreting the polarity glyphs. Okay, so you can do that for one person or the overall group, the overall energy that's there. Okay, let's say you want to go even more detailed and find out the personality, right? So in this case, if it's a one NPC, what's their overall personality? In this case, it's a group of 8 of them. So how are they acting, right? What's their personality? How are they behaving at that time? Spin and interpret the element glyphs. Okay, very simple. So in this case, water. Okay, water, as we know, is very reflective in nature, very introspective. So these are very artsy people. They're very much focusing of the piece, right? Almost to an obsessive point, and they're talking amongst themselves about how this beautiful piece of art moves them and inspires them. That's how I, as the architect, would interpret it, because I just got the water glyph. So that's the personality, or in this case, the persona of the group and how they're reacting to this piece. So already, once again, these glyphs, clues, are giving me beautiful pieces to narrate with on the fly. That's what's really awesome about this. Occupation, okay? Let's say I want to randomize these guys' occupation. So I know I have a crowd of 8 people that are very sinister looking. So in this case, they're evil, right, nefarious. And they're reflecting on the piece. They're really obsessed with it, right? Let's say my character is scanning and they want to know their occupation, or what do they think they are, right? What do these guys look like they do for a living? Okay, spend the token. Oh, that wasn't a good spin. Let me get a better spin. And for occupations, the function glyphs are the most logical ones to use, right? That's what they're for. That's one reason they're for. So function glyphs. So right here I just spun, and the function glyph that I got as a result is the wrench. So right there, they're very skill driven. So in the context, I would say they're academic in nature. They're scientists. They're alchemists maybe, and I don't know. Maybe they're priests, and they're obsessed about this piece. Maybe it's a religious piece of some kind, and you could build a story from there, right? So let's say I need more detail, and this isn't in the book, right? But let's say I need a letter clue to kind of help me out, just to jog it down a little more. So wrench, right? What occupation? Let me just toss that in there. Q. Okay, Q doesn't tell me much for profession, right? Again, you don't need to do it specifically. This is just optional stuff. C, I think that was C. I wasn't paying attention. Nah, didn't come up with nothing. So again, in this case, letter clues don't help me out much. My mind already has it figured out. So I know that this group of 8 people, they look like they're very academic in nature. Maybe, like I said, scientists or priests with the way they're dressed, because the function glyph gave me a clue. So now we have a really nice picture of the social encounter, and after that, it's up to the player character to take over and see what happens at that point. But now we've illustrated a very nice scenario randomly. Okay, so second, and probably the most common type of random encounter that we're all used to seeing in most RPGs are combat encounters, right? So generally, we roll the dice, and we look at a long list of creatures, from a compendium of some kind. That's typically what we're used to seeing in different settings, right? This particular instance is not that all different from that, except we're going to go into more detail of the encounter, okay? So for combat encounters, we're going to start off like we've been doing, and we're going to narrow things down a little bit more, okay? So first, we've already spun the token in this case, right? And in this case, it would have landed on the skull and crossbones, okay? That's how I know it's a combat encounter. Let's say that happened for this clinical tutorial. Now let's say I want to know what I'm fighting randomly, okay? So there's a couple ways to approach that. Ideally, the best way is to have, a compendium of your own entities that you've created, just like I told you about in the entity chapter. Have a nice running list, right, in your Excel sheet, or print your own and, track them that way, manually, if that's what you prefer. That's, again, it's entirely up to you how you manage your campaign. But ideally, you want to have each monster, your entity, mapped to a certain digit. Okay, so ideally, if you have the time, do 10 per class if you can, or maybe before you begin the setting or a day before when you go to prep, take 10 of them or 5 or 10 and then map them to the digits, okay, and simply spin it, and that's your monster for the day. Because creating monsters can be time consuming from scratch, but it's well worth the time. Now, in this example, we're just going to look at it by monster class, okay? So simply spin, right? Interpret your digits like we normally do. That's a number 5 from my perspective. So I look at my default list here on page 437, and that's an elemental, okay? So I know right off the bat I'm going to be finding an elemental. So right there I could pull from my other list if I've created one, different types of elementals and so forth, and I'll know what I'm fighting, okay? So let's say, just for clinical purposes, I'm fighting an elemental. Where did my pen go? Oh, there we go. So elemental 5. Taking notes here as we go, like always. Now, let's say I want to randomize how many of these guys I'm fighting, okay? Now, you could do the amount of entities first and then do one for each type of entity. That is a lot more time consuming, but I mean, obviously it's up to you to tweak and experiment how you see fit. I always keep saying that. But let's say randomly, I know I'm fighting an elemental, right? Let's say it's a Grissassin from my example. Let's say I got a Grissassin in front of me. How many of these guys am I going to fight? Okay, so I randomize. Let's see what we're going to do to randomize the numbers. Now, a couple different approaches with that. So let's see. Let me just check my notations here and make sure my calculations are accurate. So yeah, generally just spin the digits, okay? Now, with the digits, be careful because these are very big. So, 0 through 9 or 1 through 10, that's a lot of entities. It can happen real quick because of the number range, okay? So in this case, I got 8. It's pretty big, okay? Now, let's say you wanted to go to a small scale. You don't want to throw up to 10 people at somebody, right? You could just simply spin the token and use your element glyphs from 1 to 4, right? So carbon through air if you want to go that route. So in this case, water here, that's 1 monster. And let's say it landed on air, it could be 4. So if I'm doing a short range amount, 1 through 4, right, is carbon through air. But generally, you want to use the digits. Now, let's say you want the character to face a horde of monsters. Let's say I spin, and this, from my perspective, 9. Okay, 9 is a result. That's a pretty ridiculous amount. But let's say that's not good enough for me. Let's say I really want to make sure that this guy's dead. A total party kill, right? The party walks in. 1 Grissassin's not enough, right? 9 isn't enough. That's really bad, but it's still not enough. Let's say I want even more, just to make sure they're dead, right? I have the option to simply multiply this or cross sum it. So let's say I cross sum it, right? So I spin once, I spin twice. Guess what? 9 and 2. So you cross sum it, and that's 92. So that's a really nasty way to do this, but if you want to go that route for overkill, that is one way you could do that. Okay, so enough about that. Now, let's see. Now I do that also because some entities, they do travel in packs, right? Wolves travel in groups, other creatures, they hunt in different packs and stuff. So that's another interpretation you can do. Again, experiment with the numbers and see what works best for you, but enough about that. So let's have some fun here with the states glyphs. So I want to know actually a couple things. Number one, their formation, right? How are they arranged? Okay, because that's going to have a big impact on how I confront them or they confront me, right? So states glyphs are very important. We're going to look at the inner symbol, and that's going to give us an idea of their arrangement, okay? So follow me here. Spin. Okay, you don't have to spin it that slow. You could just be quick as long as it's random, right? We already know that. Nothing new. So here, states glyphs. So triangle, square, hexagon, dotted circle, right? We've already talked about that. So in this case, from my perspective, These are pretty level, but honestly, this one looks a little bit more upright, barely, from my perspective. So I'm going to go with linear, barely. I could go triangle, but this one looks a little more upright, so I'm going to go with the square linear states glyph. So what that tells me, once again, the lines, right? Lines indicate linear, right? Look at the lines, look at the clues. In this context, it's a very, right? That's what that tells me. So in a combat scenario up against these elementals, they're marching towards me in a linear, very structured fashion, almost like soldiers, right? That's a way you could describe it, okay? Very simple. Let's say I spin it, right? And I'm just messing around here. Don't hold it against me. Let's say that it lands on the hexagon. Let's say that cluster symbol, right? So in this case, this example, they're clustered together, they're packed together, they're ready for you to come take them on, right? So very compact formation area, and they're stationary and they're ready to resist you. Okay, let's say it landed on the dotted circle. This is really cool stuff to experiment with. So let's say it landed on the dotted circle for formation. Okay, that means they're either displaced all over the place, right? They're scattered about, right? Just like the dots indicate here, they're scattered all over the area, or they've surrounded you. Okay, that's up to the architect how to interpret, depending on how mean they want to be. But you could also say that you've been surrounded completely by the Glyphs, just like it indicates here. That's a very powerful clue, right? So these are very neat ways to really change the whole battlefield, just with glyph clues. Okay. Now, one other thing here, and I may or may not have put this in the book. I'm kind of in a rush, but let's say I want to know what direction they are from my perspective. So, where are these guys approaching from my perspective? Okay. For that, look at the cardinal glyphs. We don't use these too often unless it specifically has to do with direction or position, right? So they're from the east. So for my character or party's position, these Glyphs are approaching from the east, okay? So on a map, it's very nice to have handy. You just simply mark that, and that's going to drive the battle in and of itself, okay? So very powerful stuff here that we've just done. So we're not just interested in randomly just throwing in monsters like we're used to seeing, but we want to know more details, amounts of entities, how they're arranged in formation, how they're approaching, where they're coming from, and so forth. So very powerful stuff here that we just went over. So that pretty much covers it for random encounters. Now let's move on to the next type. Set encounters, another one of my favorites. So how do we randomize random skill checks, right? Okay, so very simple. First off, assuming in this scenario that I've spun my token and it landed on the wrench function glyph, okay, that's, as we talked about earlier, is going to mean that this is a skill set challenge. The wrench implies skill and tools and knowledge, right? That's what that glyph means in this context. So let's say I spun it and it lands there. I have a skill set challenge. Now, a couple ways we could approach it, okay? Let's say my characters are in a room, right? And I spun and it lands on skill set. Now, as an architect, I can just simply have something ready for them that makes sense on the context of their surroundings. That's one approach that I use a lot personally. But let's say I want to completely randomize it from there. Spin the digits, okay? You've seen this pattern already, and we're going to interpret the results. So, in this case, 6. And I'm going to look at my pre-made list of defaults or come up with your own, right? And by the way, all of these default scenarios are on the architect grid that's available for purchase as an accessory. All of that's there for you for your convenience, okay? But let's see. So skill set encounters. Okay, 6, expressive. Okay, let's take a look at that. I rolled randomly 6. It's a skill set encounter. So this encounter basically implies that the character or party is tasked with using creative talents to accommodate a certain group, right? Oh, that can be very interesting. So maybe you have a character that's emulating a bard, or maybe a monster needs to be tamed with music. Maybe that's one interpretation. I mean, only you know the answer as the architect when you're in the middle of a story. I'm just coming up stuff with thin air. But basically, in this skill set, you're a challenge to use your creative talents to appease somebody, right? So, maybe you're in the city and you see a group of people and you need to make money, right? And then you have one character that happens to be very good at playing a violin. Okay, my vampire character is very skilled with a violin, so maybe you need to make some money. So you see an opportunity there. Skill set challenge comes and challenges you to play your violin to appease the crowd, right? In this context, that answer makes sense to me. I mean, obviously only you know it's best in your scenario, but to me that makes sense. So I'm going to go with that. So expressive, I am tasked to play my violin to appease the crowd. Let's just... Now with skill set, random encounters, difficulty is very important. How do we come up with random difficulty, okay? So, in other words, how skilled am I versus how difficult the crowd is to please? Okay, how hard are these people to please? In this context, that makes sense. So, with random skill set encounters, we have 10 digits, right? But we only have 6 options, right? 1 through 6 as far as difficulties go, just like we've seen in skills, right? Unless you go with 0, which is assumed, but I'm not... If it were assumed, I wouldn't have to randomize it, right? So I'm looking for 1 through 6. Now I have 10 digits, so I have to group them together, just like we've seen before, I believe in the last chapter, to come up with results. So simply spin your digits, and let's see. I spun, from my perspective, the most upright is a 6. Okay, and to get your correct difficulty number 35, okay, it'll tell you the digit results based on what you spin. So I spun a 6, right? So that's a complex difficulty. So here it gives you the different digit groupings. So had I spun a 2 or a 3, it would have been moderate difficulty and so forth. If I spun a 0, it's monumental. In this case, I scored a 6. Or if it would have been a 7, okay, it's complex. So the challenge, the skill set challenge of appeasing this crowd is complex. So these people are pretty hard to please. After that, you simply proceed with a skill check, just like you normally would, and we've reviewed that quite a bit in the skill set chapter. Simply use the action grid, do your skill checks, and so forth. So that's all there is to it for random skill set encounters. Pretty straightforward. Again, narrow down your topic, narrow down the specific scenario, and then using the page, let's see, page 435 to reference your digit scores and match them to a default challenge difficulty, and then complete the challenge. That's all there is to it. Situational encounters. Let's talk about that real quick. So that's a great way to throw a wrench in absolutely everything as far as the character experience. So besides the usual random monsters and skill set challenges, right, skill checks and all the character driven stuff, let's throw a curveball and throw something random as far as the environment goes. So something that's outside of the overall scope of the plot that can have a direct effect on the character and maybe lead to side quests or other things. So random situational encounters, the easiest, quickest ones to do, in my opinion. So simply, first of all, let's assume that we've spun our token and it lands on the clock function glyph. Okay, that designates in this context a situational event type of encounter, right? So let's assume that happened, and we simply want to randomize, spin your digits, and look at the list, or create your own list, right, of 10 different defaults. That's up to you. Okay, so in this case, my result is 5. And it's a disaster, okay? Based on my list that I have here, it's disaster. So simply, again, depending on your character's position or maybe somewhere else in town or whatever, a disaster suddenly strikes, right? So cataclysmic disaster that strikes and affects the immediate area location. So a flood happens, an earthquake, splits the town in half, and your character happens to be in the way. Something completely beyond the scope of the plot itself, right? Those are the kind of things that can happen in an instant with situational random encounters. So very powerful stuff here to consider. Now, let's say that, as an example here, I just want to talk about this. I think it's important. Let's say that for whatever reason it landed on a 0, right? When I'm randomizing, that implies condition. So 0, let's say that was my result as an example only, very clinical here. So 0, okay, condition. So conditions we've talked about in the environment chapter and how they can affect, the character's experience depending on the locations, hazards, and so forth. So generally conditions will always make sense based on the area. Obviously, if you're doing everything scripted, to me that makes the most sense. But let's say for whatever reason you want to randomize it completely and really screw things up, right? You can do that as the architect. You can do whatever you want. So let's do that. Let's say that in this example it landed on 0, which is condition, and I want to randomize that. So for that, I've got a list here of conditions of the sample ones, okay? Let's see. Let me go back on my notes here. So situational encounters, let's talk about that. So on page 436, there are the default conditions that are in the environment chapter there for you, because we're going to use letter clues. Okay, if you want a random condition, okay, this is assuming that you don't want to do something that would normally make sense. Like I said, you want to really screw things up, then this is for you. So toss your token in the OmniGrid. This is one of those few times we're going to use the OmniGrid here, right? And let's see what happens. So just going to go for some letter clues here. Okay, A. Just going to get a few in real quick. Let's push that down here, right there. C. Try to narrow down a random condition. There's a lot of possibilities. And let's toss that there. F. See if that tells me anything. Okay, let's narrow that down a little bit. Got a couple possibilities I'm toying with. Let's just go clinical. Let's see. Okay, random here. Zone here, so that's K. Oh, guess what? First thing that came to mind for me is quicksand. So no Q. You don't have to have the whole word. Again, these clues just simply jog your mind. That's so important to understand with letter clues. Okay, the first thing that really jogs your mind, that jumps out in your mind's eye, is the one that your result, right? So quicksand. So C and K and A, right? F doesn't do anything for me, but these in here are in quicksand, right? That to me that's the first condition that comes to mind. So maybe randomly, your character's walking into an abandoned site, whatever, and they step into quicksand or something like it. Now, these conditions aren't literal. Sometimes you can substitute something that makes the most sense. So maybe there's freshly poured cement they just stepped into. Maybe that's something you can interpret it as, but or mud, right? Very greasy, slick, thick mud, or literal quicksand that they just stepped into. Okay, it's up to you how you interpret it. Again, it's your game. You do as you please, but that is a very powerful way. Okay, the OmniGrid is extremely powerful at giving you that extra set of clues that you need to make it happen if you need to go there. But the default list method works very well for random encounters. So that's all there is to it. Very fun, very powerful stuff. Again, I really encourage you to take your time with this and experiment with this system. I spent damn near 7 years developing this thing from scratch. I mean, I don't get a lot of credit for that either, but here I am. I'm still at it. I'm doing all this for you. But really, it's beyond just the book and the work itself. Ultimately, it's about you and what you make of it. So really, take your time, experiment with the system, especially the glyphs themselves and the OmniGrid and this whole interface, okay? And see what you come up with, and you'll develop your own style of using this to your advantage, okay? So I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Now let's move on to the rest of the chapter. Okay, so now that we've had lots of fun once again tinkering with the token and exploring different randomization methods for random encounters, now I want to talk about something a little bit more maybe familiar that some of you are used to. Okay, we're going to talk about what I call zoned encounters and notoriety states. Okay, so notoriety, let's just touch on that real quick, get that out of the way, and focus on the zoned encounters portion. So notoriety states. So how suspicious is your character? This talks about um, if you're in a society or you're in public or whatever, how's your character perceived by everybody else, especially authorities, right? So, are you threatening looking? Are you breaking the law? Do you stand out somehow, or do you blend in? That's what we're talking about with notoriety. So, your notoriety can have an impact on how you're perceived, and more importantly, if you're pursued at some point by authorities and villagers or whatever. So, real quick, undetected. If you're undetected, that means you're invisible. Nobody can see you, you hear you, you're completely hidden, right? That's pretty obvious, okay? So you're a ninja, okay? Awesome. So next, you're incognito. Now, the second one is incognito. That's the standard one to go with. So you're just like everybody else. You blend in with the crowd. You don't really stand out too much. You don't deviate from the norm, right? So incognito should be the default notoriety state if you're tracking that. Again, you don't have to track all this stuff, but it's there optional for you to add realism and consequence to your campaign experience. So incognito is pretty standard. Suspicious. Okay, let's talk about that real quick. So suspicious, so it means an entity or an NPC, they become suspicious when a character's actions, appearance, equipment breach the threshold of social norms, okay, or whatever. So the character may also raise suspicion if for whatever reason they're functioning in an undetected capacity, only to be suddenly discovered, right? You come out of nowhere, you're invisible, and you just appear out of nowhere in the middle of a crowd, right? That would certainly be suspicious to me. So that's what that means, okay? Now, when a character becomes suspicious, nearby entities and NPCs at an X% chance, so that's why we're going to cover this here in this section, they're going to investigate the character or the party, they're going to observe you, they'll question you, they might apprehend you, for investigation. Or they could potentially attack you if you're threatening, right? So once you're suspicious, you're on the radar, right? The question mark, the exclamation mark goes off on their head, right? That's essentially what that means, okay? So when we talk about X percentage of chance, let's talk about percentages real quick. I don't think we've covered that. A very simple concept, but let's say you're suspicious, right? And you want to randomly determine the percentage of when they'll attack. Okay, so X percentage, let's say, oh, that's terrible. There's a 90% chance, right, that they're going to investigate you if you're suspicious, right? That's all that means in that case. So now let's move on real quick to wanted. So being wanted means you have a target on your head, right? Pretty self-explanatory. So monsters, NPCs, obviously whatever is applicable, who perceive the character as wanted, right? Or at least to them, they'll stop at nothing to either apprehend, attack, kill, or subdue, okay? So in most cases, the character can be wanted by one particular NPC or particular society, but that may only apply to that one area, okay? But sometimes it can carry over to different territories or planets. I mean, again, depending on what setting you're playing. But wanted means you're probably going to be attacked on sight in the wrong place. Okay, that's all that means. Okay, famous is basically the opposite, obviously. So you draw a lot of attention in civilized areas. You're popular. People love you. You're rich looking. You're a celebrity. You're a badass warrior, right? All that good stuff. But the flip side of that is, good attention can sometimes be negative attention. You don't want to draw too much attention to your character, regardless, because that can flip out on you real quick. So that's it for notoriety. Now that I've talked about percentages very briefly, let's explore that here further in zoned encounters. That's at least my term. So very simple way of saying we can randomize the types of encounters that happen in specific areas. Okay. It's an awesome little map I printed randomly here from the web. Pretty cool stuff here. So real quick here, nothing fancy, just to kind of show you what I mean very clinically here. So let's see. So got my dungeon here, right? My little area. And as the architect, I love having a bird's eye view of everything. So when I run a campaign, I do all my maps from scratch in Photoshop or Illustrator. I design everything from scratch. And then I'll superimpose the grid over them. I have my laptop running here on the side, so I like to have a bird's eye view at all time. Helps me run my games better. That's my own personal style. Again, you'll develop your own. But let's say I'm going to take and build on that premise, right? So let's say I've got my map here, and I don't want to say every room you're going to go into, you're going to be, assaulted by zombies and hordes of monsters. Okay, there's a chance that could happen, okay? And that's what I want to illustrate here. There's a chance that could happen, an X percentage chance that a certain random encounter can happen. So this is a very nice approach to take for that. So let's say here, let me get my little tokens out here just for illustration's sake. Again, this is unscripted, unrehearsed, straight from the source. So forgive the noises here. So here we go. So let's say I've got my rogue character, a nice gray token here, and saying exploring the dungeon, right? So again, the grid's not even up to size, just gives you an estimate, right? Doesn't matter. So here, and let's say I'm marching down here, right? Exploring the dungeon, right? And guess what? In this little zone here, in this little square area, there's a 50% chance as I arrive that a social encounter will take place. That's what this tells me. Now again, I already pre-generated these symbols here just to be clean and neat and professional, but you at your term can simply just write in the symbol here, like, very, terrible writing if you need it, or just make up your own, right? Skull and crossbones, or the clock, right? Or the wrench. So here, right? You could draw that on your own map, or, very nicely do it computer generated, or simply write the name. It doesn't matter. It's all up to you how you manage your campaign, right? So here in this zoned encounter, there's a 50% chance that a social encounter will happen. So how do we interpret that? So simply spin the digits, and I have to get 5 or under, right? That's how we could read that. So, oh, guess what? I got a 5. That's awesome. So I'm right on target with that. So guess what? That tells me that a social encounter did happen, right? Let's say I didn't miss my percentile. I missed my percentile, and that means nothing happened. It could have happened, but it didn't. So in this case, it did. So now I'm going to randomize the type of social encounter. So spin again. And I simply go to my list. So once again, result is 5. And social encounters. So nourishment. Oh, guess what? So 5. Here, page 437. Taking a break to recover, eat, drink, eat, and replenish EP. So this is the time to where you could say this is a good opportunity for the party to rest, drink, renourish yourself, or maybe you see somebody in there already who's doing the same thing. That's entirely up to the architect how to interpret, but that's a very good example of how we randomize encounter in strategic locations based on percentages of likelihood, okay? So the same applies to all of these here. So let's say I'm over here, right? As an example, let's say I march into this room. There's a 30% chance that a random situational event is going to happen, right? So that's all you do. Go here. There's a 30% chance, right? Spin my token. Oh, guess what? And randomly I rolled a 2. So guess what? Something randomly happens. Then I spin again. To it. Very simple, very clinical, very neat approach to randomizing encounters with a nice bird's eye view. Okay. Now, alternatively, you could simply cross out percentages, right? And just say for every room you walk in with a logo, right, a glyph here, that's going to define the encounter that will happen, which 100%, and in that case, it's probably going to be scripted anyways. So, very nice bird's eye view of zone encounters and notoriety states here. Great tools for you to have. So that pretty much covers that for you. Now let's see, is there anything else I need to talk about? Oh yeah, one more segment here. Actually two to go over here. So stay tuned, and we'll talk about it in just a second. Random treasure and rewards. Let's talk about that. So, to reward your players with random stuff, right? Instead of just having everything pre-plotted out, like I like to do. I'm gonna be honest, I'm pretty guilty of that. But let's say you just want to randomize the experience, right? So you walk into a room and there's gold in front of you. How much gold, right? Instead of me telling you having it preset, how do we randomize it? So with currency, let's talk about that. So currency, simply spin the digits one time, and that's going to tell you how many times to spin the token, okay? So 2 is my result. So I'm going to spin the token twice and use those digits to give me a cross sum of bits, right? So here, I spin once. My first is 5. And my second time is 4. And then convert it into bits. So 54 bits. Okay? And then, see here, I'm taking my notes. So that's all you do. Very simple calculations. See if we can see that here. So first, tell me how many times to spin it. Okay, in this case, twice. I spin it twice, because that's what I rolled, right? Convert it into bits. Once you get your bits, simply convert it into the currency. That's all there is to it. Very simple. Okay? Let's talk about random relics. Now, with relics, magic items, really powerful stuff. It's a good idea, because you're dealing with something very specific. It's a good idea to have a pre-made list and simply map them to the digits or the element glyphs. Spin it, and the result is your relic, right? That's a good idea. Or, if you're really brave and you really want to be extremely random, use your clues. Very dangerous to do, but if you want to go there, that's great. Letter clues. So you. What does you mean? Okay, you, umbrella. Okay, that's a random item that came into my head. Oh, guess what? Umbrella as a relic. Oh, automatically I think of Mary Poppins. Pretty scary, okay? But that's what came up in my mind. So maybe I found an umbrella of flying, right? I open it and I can levitate. Okay. Again, random is dangerous. Can open up some pretty wild possibilities, but that really just happened, okay? So recovery items. Let's talk about random recovery items. Again, I've only listed some of the stuff that are most critical to the campaign in the book. You can obviously expand on it on your own. This game system is meant for design-minded people like you, so that's awesome to know. So recovery items. So here, in my opinion, we should be using the element glyphs if we want to randomly determine the recovery item. So you walk into the alchemist lab, right? You see potions everywhere. And what recovery items do we have? So now for this, I'm using the element glyphs because I'm going, again, 1 through 4. From least powerful to most powerful with a range of 4 possibilities. Okay, so the element glyphs, like I said, very nice to consider them as a range. So carbon is 1, fire is 2, water is 3, air is 4 by default, right? So in this case, fire I have here is 2. So let's see, off the bat, that tells me that it heals minor wounds, okay? If it's 1, and again, this is my own interpretation, interpret it how you want. Let's say I rolled 1, which was carbon, it would only heal status elements, but not actual wounds. So fire would be minor wounds, water would be heavy wounds, and air would be critical wounds. That's, if you want to go that route. Again, it's up to you how you want to randomize it. I recommend having a list of pre-made objects, okay, if you want to go there, or if you're really brave, once again, use letter clues for recovery items. We're mostly concerned with intensity, right? So that's there if you need it. I personally haven't used it. I haven't had to, but it is there for you. Now, consumables, right? Consumables are very important, right? Drinks, food, dishes, stuff like that, designed to not only nourish your character and keep them alive, but to recover ether points. So multipliers are very important in this context. So, okay, once again, we're going to use our element glyphs. Now, we have 3 flavor ranks that we can consider, 1 through 3. So we have 4 possibilities. So guess what? One of these has to be 0. So carbon will be 0 in this context. Fire will be 1. Water will be 2. And air will be 3, because there's only 3 possibilities and there's 4 options, right? So again, page 441 shows you that. I'm just showing you clinically here for the tutorial. So let's say I walk in, and there's this awesome feast of food waiting for my characters, right? I broke into the king's castle, and I'm intruding right before dinner starts. The table's set in front of my characters, and I'm ready to gorge, right? And I need, not only am I starving, but I need some EP replenished in my character's body. So what do we do here? So I just spun the token as you just saw. So my result is water. So, oh, that's pretty nice. That is a value of 2, flavor rank of 2. So that food, very well prepared. So almost the best quality you can think of. So, in my mind, 4 is technically fit for a king, right? Or a flavor rank of 3, right? So almost perfect. So good enough for most people to eat. Maybe somebody's going to get hanged at the end of the session, okay, because the food could have been maybe better for that particular royal person, but for the party's purposes, they're only concerned about the flavor rank. In this case, it's 2, right? So that's all there is to it. With that, very simple way to approach it. Okay, and again, it's up to you to explore and expand as you see fit, but those are my interpretations, and I think they make sense. So now we're going to talk about one more section for the chapter. We're going to deal with awareness checks. Okay, so stay tuned. Awareness checks. Okay, so does the character perceive certain stimuli based on their senses, right? So other games have their own interpretations of, sight check, vision check, all that stuff, right? That's essentially what this is here. So does your character hear the noise? Do they see something that other people can't see, right? So that's essentially what we're going to do with awareness checks. Is does your character perceive X something, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So this is randomized. I think that's a very nice approach to the sense check here. So first of all, we have to consider your character's sense rank. Okay, so vision, let's say is level 2, which is normal, right? So level 2 vision, and again, your sense ranks are on the very front of the character booklet, and entities also have senses. So that's when this comes into play here as awareness checks, okay? So does the entity or character perceive X stimuli, right? That's what we're talking about here. So level 2 vision, okay, tells me that I have a 2, right, sense value that we're going to add to the percentile attempt, okay? Next here again, I have my senses, or my stimuli, so light, sound, scent, and flavor, right? So you'll see here in the book, and again, take a look at this chart here. It's also in the architect quick gen screen, right? But on 442, it explains awareness checks, okay? So let's say, as an example, I have a level 2 vision, okay, right? And the I see something very faint in the distance, right? So to me, something very faint in the distance, something random I see, maybe something scurry across the hallway, right? Not everybody's going to notice it, but in the blink of my eye, I happen to see it, right? So as maybe a level 1 stimuli, so faint, right? Light. So level 1 light, because we're dealing with vision. If it were sound, it would be hearing. So let's say I had a level 2 hearing, so pretty average, right? And a footstep, let's say, emits, a faint sound, level 1 of sound, right? So faint, right? So let's see. Let's talk about that. We've already talked about stimuli in the environments chapter, but here it's important for percentiles. So those percentiles there are calculated for you. Now in this case, we want to beat the percentile target, okay, not fall under. In this case, because we're factoring in sense bonuses, we want to. So let's say in this example, I don't know, I'm just talking here random hearing, right? And level 1 stimuli. Okay, so a faint footstep, I think I heard something from behind my character, right? Let's just say that's the example. So simply refer to my stimuli chart here. So sound is level 1, which is, a faint sound, right? So the target I need to beat is 80%, right? So we're going to randomize this here. Okay, it's very simple in practice. I know I'm a little long-winded here. I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands this portion, because they see percentages and they go, what am I looking at, right? So 80% because it's a faint sound, so a footstep or whatever. Now, my level 2 hearing in this example is going to contribute to my success. So when I randomize, I spin the digits here and simply add in my sense bonus to try to beat that 80%, that 80, right? So 3 in my digits plus 2 is 5. So in this case, I failed the sense check, the awareness check to hear. So I didn't actually hear the footstep coming on to me, and guess what? I probably just got stealth attacked, right? Now, let's say, and again, just very clinical, let's say I spend the token, right? And let's say, just for the sake of illustration, it lands on 7, right? 7 is lower than 80%, so I would have failed that check. But guess what? Because my sense rank is 2, I have to add that in, right? So 7 plus 2 is 9. So in this example here, let's say I spun a 7 plus 2 vision, or 2 hearing, is 90, right? So I exceeded that, so it means I was barely able to hear the faint footstep in the background. So that's all we're doing here. Again, just spend the token to get your digit, okay, very simple, and add in your sense rank bonus, okay, your score. So 3 is 30, right? And then 2 is 20, so 55, right? So 50, and then it exceeds or falls below the target of whatever you're doing. That's all there is to it. So if it falls below for the awareness check, it's a fail. If it exceeds the target percentage, it's a pass. That's all you need to know for that. So that's all there is for the Encounters chapter. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you learned a lot. A very fun chapter, and we are close to the finish line. We only have 1 chapter left to cover, which is kind of optional. You need to know as far as the fundamentals in Glyphs. Thank you very much for joining me. Let's go now. Let's talk about chapter 26 for those of you who are very brave and want to travel alone.